The bank notification came at 2:14 in the morning, and I almost ignored it. I was sitting up in the maternity ward bed, with my son on my chest, 3 days old and small enough to fit in the crook of my arm, and I was doing that thing new mothers do, where you watch them breathe, just to be sure. His name was Miles. He had his father's ears and the determined frown of someone with a lot of opinions they couldn't express yet. The room was quiet except for the hum of the IV machine, and the occasional footstep outside in the hall. I'd been awake since 1. My body hurt in ways I hadn't known were possible. My phone lit up on the bedside table, a balance alert from my bank. I assumed it was something routine, a charge I'd forgotten about, maybe the last of the baby supplies I'd ordered online, before everything happened early. I reached over carefully so I wouldn't wake Miles, and I looked at the screen. Current balance, 2,041. I put my phone down, picked it up again. The number didn't change. My name is Tamara. I'm 31 years old. I work as a pediatric dental assistant in Columbus, Ohio. And for the past 6 years I had been building a down payment for my first house, $23,500. I had the closing date circled on our kitchen calendar at home. 8 weeks out. My husband Devin and I had been pre-approved. We'd already done a walkthrough. I knew which bedroom would be Miles's nursery. I sat there in that hospital bed in the middle of the night, with my newborn son on my chest, and I stared at $2,341, and I did the math I didn't want to do. $21,158. Gone. 2 transfers. Both made in the same 90-minute window. On the same afternoon I'd been in emergency surgery for a C-section that nobody had planned. My parents were co-signers on that account. I'd added them 7 years ago, when I was 24, and my father convinced me that a joint structure would help my credit profile and give me a safety net, in case anything happened. I'd never thought much about it since. The money was mine, we all knew that. It was my name at the top of the statements. Or so I had believed. My mother arrived the next morning with a coffee carrier and 2 outfits for Miles still in the department store bags, tags swinging. She's the kind of woman who shows up prepared, who always has a gift in hand, who fills a room with competence before she even sets her purse down. She came through the door already talking about the traffic, about how the hospital parking was impossible, about how the lavender onesie was on sale and she'd grab 2. She did not look at me directly, not once, not when she hugged me, not when she leaned over the bassinet to coo at Miles, not when she poured coffee from the carrier and set a cup on my tray table. My mother has lived 62 years of her life looking every person she's ever met straight in the eye. She once stared down a DMV clerk for 25 minutes over a form error. Indirect eye contact from her means exactly one thing. She already knows what you're about to ask, and she's been rehearsing her answers since before she walked in. "Mom," I said, "I need to ask you something." "Of course, baby. How are you feeling? Is the pain?" "What happened to the house account?" She stopped, put her coffee down with the specific slowness of someone trying not to show their hands, sat in the chair beside the bed, looked at Miles, looked at the window, looked at her own hands. "There were some expenses," she said finally, "for Quentin's party. The final balance for the venue was due while you were in surgery, and we knew you wouldn't want to be stressed with it, so we just..." "You just what, Mom?" "We handled it, temporarily." She looked up then, finally, and her eyes were doing that thing where they go slightly glassy, before she decides whether to cry or get defensive. "We're going to pay it back. The plan was always to pay it back before you needed it. The closing is in 8 weeks. We know that. $21,000, Mom." She pressed her lips together. Quentin's venue deposit was non-refundable. And then the open bar contract and the photographer, and there was a daycare situation that cost more than anyone expected. I laughed. I heard it come out of me, and it didn't sound like laughing. It sounded like something tearing at the seam. Quentin, my brother, 27 years old, turning 30 in 5 weeks, who had decided at some point in the past year that his 30th birthday deserved a rooftop party in Nashville for 80 of his closest friends, with a DJ flown in from Atlanta and a catering package that included a raw bar and a custom photo booth. I had actually been the one to help him find the venue. He'd texted me a link back in January, and I'd pulled it up during my lunch break and told him the view looked incredible. I hadn't known then that my savings account would be the thing that paid for it. Devin got to the hospital around noon. He works in logistics and can usually read a room faster than anyone I've ever met. Something about years of managing warehouse floor dynamics, he says. He came in with a bag from the sandwich place down the street, took one look at my face, one look at my mother's, and set the bag on the windowsill without saying anything. "I'll give you 2 a minute," my mother said, already reaching for her purse. "Actually," Devin said not loudly, "I think you should stay." She stayed. He didn't raise his voice. He never does. He pulled up the account on his phone, turned the screen toward her, and asked her to walk him through the 2 transfers. She did it quietly, and the version she told him had more details than the version she'd given me. The venue balance was $9,400 and non-refundable. The photography package was another $6,200 because Quentin's original photographer had backed out 2 weeks before the event. The remaining $5,500 was, according to my mother, a temporary borrow for costs that had run over in the planning. "And you made these transfers while Tamara was in surgery," Devin said. "Not a question. We didn't think she'd need to. While she was under general anesthesia, without calling me." My mother said nothing. He nodded, put his phone in his pocket, sat down beside me and took my hand. That was all. That night, after visiting hours ended and the ward quieted back down, I lay in the dark and thought about what the phone call would have looked like if the surgery had gone wrong. I thought about how my father would have called Devin, and Devin would have driven to the hospital, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, my parents would have transferred $21,000 from my savings to cover a balloon installation in Nashville. I turned that thought over for a long time before I put it down. I want to tell you something about my family, because this wasn't the first time money had moved in a direction that seemed obvious to everyone except the person it came from. Quentin is the youngest and the only boy, and from the time we were children there was a kind of gravitational field around him that everything else in the house orbited. Not because my parents are cruel. They're not cruel people. They're people with a blind spot so large and so consistent that by now I've stopped being surprised by the shape of it, only by how far it extends. When I was 19 and took out my first student loan, my parents said they wished they could help, but money was tight. 2 months later, my brother wrecked his car, and they bought him a used Honda before the insurance settlement even cleared, because he needed transportation for his part-time job. I didn't say anything. I took the bus for another semester. When I graduated college, 3.5 years instead of 4, because I'd taken summer sessions to save on room and board, my mother was 30 minutes late to the ceremony. Quentin had a job interview that morning that ran long, and she'd stayed to give him moral support until it was over, then hit traffic on the way out. She made it just as I was walking off the stage. She cried and apologized. 2 weeks later, at my grandmother's Sunday dinner, the story my father told wasn't about my graduation. It was about how well Quentin had handled that interview even though he didn't get the job, and how proud they were of him for putting himself out there. When I got my first apartment at 25, I signed the lease myself, paid the deposit myself, moved in on a Saturday with Devin's pickup truck, and 2 folding tables from a garage sale. My parents said they'd try to come help, but things came up. When Quentin moved into his first apartment at 23, my father rented a U-Haul, and my mother spent a full weekend helping him unpack and organize his kitchen. I wasn't keeping score when any of this was happening. You don't count things you're not supposed to notice. But once you see the pattern, you can't look at any single piece of it the same way again. The savings account wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time the pattern left a number I could point to. Devin came home from an errand 2 days after my discharge and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and said he needed to show me something. He had gone to our bank branch in person. He'd spoken to a manager, then to someone in the fraud and dispute department. What he'd learned was this: because the transfers had been made while I was demonstrably incapacitated, under general anesthesia, with a surgical record to verify the window, and because I had not given written or verbal authorization, the bank considered the transactions potentially actionable under their unauthorized transfer policy. Not guaranteed, but not nothing. He had also found a text. My father, it turned out, had sent Quentin a message 6 days before the party with the transfer confirmation attached. The message said, "Took care of the balance from T's account. She won't need it for another couple months. We'll sort it out before then." Quentin had replied with a thumbs up. I read that text 4 times. The part that stayed with me wasn't the betrayal of it, though that was there. It was the word sort. "We'll sort it out before then." The easy confidence that my financial future was a problem to be managed on their timeline, like a bill shoved to the back of a drawer. I called my friend Priya, who had gone through law school and was now a paralegal at a civil firm downtown. We met for coffee on my 6th day after discharge, Miles in his carrier beside me, and I laid everything out as plainly as I could. She stirred her drink for a long time. Then she said, "What your parents did has a legal name. It's called unauthorized use of funds, conversion. In civil terms, the fact that their names are on the account doesn't give them unilateral authority to move $21,000 without your knowledge or consent. A joint account is not their account." She paused. "I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm telling you that you have standing, and you should know it." I sat with that. I didn't want to sue my parents. I wanted them to understand what they had done. Those aren't the same thing, and for most of my life I'd confused them, waiting for accountability to arrive in a form I hadn't asked for, from people who'd decided I didn't need it. That ended here. Quentin's birthday party was held on a Saturday night at a rooftop venue in Nashville, and I had RSVP'd yes weeks earlier when everything in my life still made sense. My first instinct after the hospital was to cancel. Devon's was different. "Go," he said. "Let them see you both." I bought Quentin a gift, a leather weekend bag he'd mentioned wanting, because none of this was ever really about him. He was a person who had been raised to believe the world accommodated him first, and he had accepted that the way most people accept, whatever they're handed as children, without questioning whether it was fair to anyone else. I couldn't be angry at him for what he'd been taught. I was still working through that. Priya helped me put together a certified demand letter, a formal request for restitution, attached to copies of the bank transaction records, a screenshot of my father's text to Quentin, and a one-page timeline of events written in the flattest language I could manage. No accusations, no emotion, just the facts in chronological order. We arranged for it to be delivered to my parents' home the afternoon of the party, timed to arrive before they left for Nashville. The night of the event I wore a blue wrap dress, the first one I'd fit back into since the delivery, and I carried Miles against my chest in his carrier. He was 8 weeks old, and had recently discovered that he liked lights. I thought he would enjoy a rooftop in Nashville at night. I was right. He spent most of the evening looking up at the string lights with the focused wonder of someone encountering something important for the first time. My parents were already there when I arrived. My mother's face when she saw me cross the rooftop was complicated in a way I recognized. Relief that I had come, guilt about the reason I'd almost not, and underneath both of those, hope. The specific hope that I had moved on in the way I had always moved on before, quietly, without requiring anything from anyone. I smiled. I hugged them both. I let my father hold Miles, who grabbed his finger and didn't let go. I mingled. I talked to cousins I hadn't seen in over a year. I ate something from the appetizer trays and watched the city lights spread out below us and thought about the house 8 weeks out, closing date now on hold, the account under dispute review at a federal bank branch. My father's older sister arrived around 8:30. She spent her career as a financial advisor and has developed over the decades what I can only describe as a professional intolerance for financial nonsense in all its forms. She found me near the edge of the rooftop and immediately asked about the house, because she'd seen my post about the closing date back in February and wanted to know how it went. "We had to push it," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Why?" I told her. The same way I'd written the letter, just the facts, just the order they happened. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned and looked across the rooftop to where my father was standing with a drink in his hand, laughing at something a neighbor had said. She walked directly toward him. She didn't yell. She's not a yeller. She stood in front of him and said, clearly enough for the people nearby to hear, "Dennis, did you pull money out of your daughter's house fund without asking her?" He looked around, shifted his weight. "That's not, it was a temporary." "Dennis, yes or no?" The group nearby had gone the particular quiet that happens at parties when something real surfaces without warning. My mother had noticed from across the room and was moving toward them. The man my father had been talking to took a small step back. My father didn't answer, he didn't need to. Quentin appeared at my elbow a few minutes later, still holding his drink, looking younger somehow than he had at the start of the evening. "I knew," he said, quietly, "just to me. It's texted me the confirmation. I kept thinking they'd put it back before you closed, and nobody would have to deal with it." He looked at Miles, not at me. "I should have called you. I'm sorry, Tamara, I know that's not enough. It wasn't everything, but it was honest, and honest had become something I no longer took for granted from anyone in my family. I told Quentin happy birthday, I meant it. I found Devin, gathered Miles's bag, said goodnight to a few cousins, and left while the DJ was still playing. My father came to our apartment 4 days later, alone, without a version of events prepared in advance. He sat at our kitchen table and said he had been wrong. Not wrong given the circumstances, not wrong in the way it was handled, just wrong. He told me that he had told himself, somewhere in the process of authorizing those transfers, that my capability had made it easier. That the fact that I always figured things out, always landed on my feet, always been the one who didn't need to be worried about, that he had used that as a reason. He knew, even as he made the calls to the bank, that he was making a choice. He made it anyway. He said he was sorry. He wrote a personal check for $15,000 before he left. The bank's fraud dispute department recovered the remaining amount through their unauthorized transaction review process. It required submitting my surgical records to establish that I had been under general anesthesia during the transfer window, but it resolved in my favor 11 days later. My mother's apology came layered. It came with explanations threaded through it, with, "You have to understand the position we were in," tucked between the words she actually meant. I accepted it for what it was. She meant it as much as she was capable of meaning something like that. And I've stopped needing her version of accountability to match mine before I can decide to move forward. Our closing date was rescheduled. We closed on a Thursday in October, Miles 5 months old, and spending most of the title company visit looking bored and solemn in his car seat. We got the keys and drove to the house and stood in the empty room that would become his nursery. Afternoon light coming through the window we'd chosen because of exactly that. Quentin and I have had 2 real conversations since the party. The kind where nobody performs anything. He's trying, I can see that. Whether it holds over time is something only time will show, and I've gotten better at not deciding in advance how those stories end. I look at this house sometimes and think about what it cost. Not the dollar amount. The closing disclosure has all of that. I mean what it cost to get here. 6 years of automated transfers on the 15th and the 30th of every month, through 2 job changes and a pandemic and a year when I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make rent and still managed to leave that savings account untouched. Every dollar was a decision I made deliberately, quietly, without asking for credit, because that's who I had always been in my family, the one who handled things on her own. I'm still that person, but I'm done being the one that quality gets taken from. Some things are worth fighting for, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is look at the people who raised you and say, clearly and without anger, that you are not the one they take from anymore, and mean it all the way down. If you stayed with me through all of this, thank you. It still isn't easy to tell. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from today, and tell me what you would have done in my place. I'll be reading every single one.